welcome back to Happy Apple Core Homestead. Today we're going to make dill pickles. I'm going to tell you everything that you need. I will be making a double batch recipe today here in the video because I have a lot of cucumbers, but in the description box I will put the single batch recipe down there for you. Of course you're going to need cucumbers. I've got these pickling cucumbers which are actually kind of large, but that's okay. They're going to make great pickles. I also have some dill here from the garden. There was a lot of bugs on them when I got them. The pollinators love the dill. As you may know, there are many different ways to make pickles. Refrigerator pickles is one way, but we're gonna water bath ours, which is why I have my water bath canner here. This is basically just a very large pot with a rack on the bottom. I am using some ball type jars here, and you will also need the matching lids. So this is a wide mouth jar, so I have wide mouth lids to go on. There are different types of lids that you can get. There are Tatler lids. There are obviously many different brands of lids. These are Kerr, but you can get Ball or whatever. I don't have a favorite, you guys. I try not to buy the ones from the dollar store, so I do tend to go more for the name brand, but that doesn't mean that they are really perfect, because they're definitely not, especially not these last few years. You're going to need some peppercorns. A lot of times people like to put garlic in their dill pickles. I'm not going to use garlic this time. These are just very basic dill pickles. I have some pickle crisp here, which does help keep the pickles firm in the canning process. You can also use grape leaves if, like me, you're also growing grapes or you have a friend who is. Grab a couple of those and use that instead, or use it in addition to. I actually am growing grapes and I have tons of grape leaves, but for this batch I'm not going to use them. You're also going to need some salt. I use pickling and canning salt as opposed to iodized salt. Iodized salt is going to make your pickle water cloudy. It's not going to hurt anything, it's just not going to be as appealing. And then I've got some vinegar here. This is 5% acidity. It's important that it's 5%. It shouldn't be below that, is what I'll say. You're also going to need a pot for your cooking liquid. And here in front of me, I also have a bubble popper and a funnel. You might not need the funnel, but the bubble popper is important for making pickles. I also have a measuring cup here to measure out the water and the vinegar. Other than a couple little tiny things like a ladle, this is basically what you're going to need to make your own pickles at home. And the next step is to wash the cucumbers because they definitely have dirt on them. I just grabbed them right out of the garden a little while ago, and also rinse off your dill and make sure that there's no residual bugs or anything like that on there. And I still have these long stalks. I will be cutting those off and just keeping the flowers. The flower heads are what you want to use for this recipe. And if you have questions on an alternative, if you can't get your hands on fresh dill, let me know down in the comments and I'll tell you the different things that I've used that have worked out very nicely. Back behind me here, I have all of my jars, other than these two, ready to go. They've all been sanitized. I have plastic wrap over the top because once I sanitize them, I store them, and then this way I don't have to sanitize them twice. And also, I need to clean these lids. It's no longer necessary to boil the lids, probably because they use a whole lot less of this rubber or whatever it is on the inside of the lids. So we're not going to be boiling the lids. I will hand wash them over at the sink, and the rest of the sanitization will happen in the canner. Once we get our cucumbers washed, there is a couple other steps. Mostly, we're going to be cutting the blossom end off. You can also cut the stem end off if you want to. Some people advise leaving the stem end on, or even leaving a portion of the stem exposed. I cut them both off, and also we're going to be slicing these. I have very different sized cucumbers, and so we're going to try to cut them so that they are approximately the same size. That way they will cook evenly in the canner. The cucumbers are clean. The dill has been cleaned and trimmed. And you may want to leave your dill in the beautiful main flower form. I have went ahead and cut them smaller, but they do look awfully pretty when you leave those main stems. So not the long stem, but the main stems up to the flower. It looks so beautiful in the jar. Next I'm cutting both ends off, both the stem end and the blossom end. And I'm doing that because my cucumbers are so big. I am going to need to cut them in more than halves. But, depending on the size of your cucumbers, the most important part is that you cut the blossom end off, which is this end here. And then you can either eat this or, like, I'm going to give it to my chickens because it's a special treat for them. Then you will cut your cucumber in half and decide whether or not there are too many large seeds for you. If there are, you can cut it again in quarters. Now this is too long to fit into my pint jar. We're using pint jars today. So I'm actually going to cut these in half again. And I am not going to cut the seeds out of this because they're not big and gross looking. And sometimes people like the seeds. That's totally fine. There's no problem with that. They tend to come out in the water bath anyway and just float to the bottom. So once we get all of these cut, we're just going to set them aside in a bowl. And after that, we'll move on to the next step. The cucumbers have been washed and cut, and they will fit in the jars. I kind of tested to make sure that all of these pieces will fit properly in the jars given the headspace that's necessary, which, by the way, is a 1/2 inch, and we will talk about that again as we go over here. I did also wash all of my lids, and I think the next thing we're going to do is just hop over to the stove, get the cooking liquid done, and then we'll start filling the jars and finish the canning process. This is not going to take too long, you guys. This is a pretty basic recipe, and I think it'll go pretty fast. See you soon. The first thing we need is 6 cups of water. Remember, this is a double batch, and we're going to go ahead and turn this stove up just to a low temperature for now while we get all the ingredients in. That's all the water we need. Now let's do the vinegar. We do need 5½ cups. We also need 1/2 cup of the canning salt. Just trying to remind you guys, this is a double batch. If you want a single batch, look in the description box for the single batch measurements. Okay, looks good. We're gonna let this come to a boil. And in the meantime, we're going to take the protective covers off of the sanitized jars. We'll be putting the pickles, the dill, as well as the peppercorns and the pickle crisp into the jars directly, so not into this pot. When this gets up to a boil, we'll go to the next step. Now that the brine has boiled, it's time to get the jars filled. We'll start by putting in a few peppercorns. Just 4 or 5. I mean, I think I put in more than that, but it will be tasty. And about 1/2 teaspoon of the pickle crisp. And a small little handful of the dill right into the bottom of the jar. Then you'll place your cucumbers in. I like to make sure that the cucumbers are below the 1-inch line. We will be filling this jar with the brine up to the 1/2-inch line, which is right here. You can grab your funnel and go ahead and fill up. And there we have it. Our brine is right here at the 1/2-inch mark. Then you'll take your water-soaked paper towel and clean the rim of your jar. Then you'll want to take your bubble popper, make sure that you go around the outside edge. And frankly, it would be best if you wipe your rim after that. No need to do it twice, just do it after the bubble pop. And then you grab your, if you have one of these, I've got a magnet on the end, which will grab the lid and pop that right onto the jar, and then put the ring on. Finger tight is all you need, no need to reef it down hard. I'll get the rest of these filled and we'll move on to the next step. All the jars are filled and it is time to put them in the canner. Make sure that you're using some kind of a rack in the bottom of your water bath canner that protects the jars from breaking, getting too hot there on the bottom and breaking from thermal shock. Last night it got late and I completed my jars and then went ahead and put them in the refrigerator overnight so that we could get started again this morning. That's perfectly fine to do. Just don't leave your jars out on the counter overnight. I know some of us, we get busy canning and we lose track of time and all of a sudden it's either time to feed the family or time to go to bed. And that's fine. Almost everything can just go in the refrigerator overnight, but the important thing to remember is to start with a cold canner if you're going to be using cold jars. Otherwise, again, the thermal shock issue. So if we had done this last night with the hot brine in the jars and the jars were nice and warm, then we would also use warm water in the canner. But for now, everything is cold. I already did the other half of them, which is why there's only 6 jars here left to put in the canner, although this rack does hold 7 jars, pints or quarts. And we're just gonna set them in. Okay, just like that. And then we'll lower it down into the canner. One of my little jars flipped over. Put that back up. Okay, and then you want to make sure that there is 1 to 2 inches of water over the top, and that's how much water is on top of my jar. So that's about, 1.5 to 2 inches. Okay, got those in nice. Go ahead and put the lid on, and I recommend slowly bringing the temperature up, especially if you're starting everything cold. Because it can just heat up too fast and then the material inside the jars are still cold and that can cause a thermal shock issue. So go ahead and put it on I've got it on a number 2, which is like a medium-low temperature. That'll just bring this temperature up nice and slow so that everything heats evenly. Once it gets to a rolling boil, I will come back and show you that and we will then start our timer. We are at a full rolling boil. Just show you that really quick and pop the lid back on. So we will start our timer for 10 minutes. Pints are processed at 10 minutes if you're at sea level, and quarts would be 15 minutes. Check your recipe for your elevation, depending on how high you are, you may need to increase your processing time. The timer has gone off, so we'll turn the heat off, and very carefully, don't forget your mitts, pick up your pot and move it over to a cool burner and remove the lid. Then we'll set a timer for 5 minutes before we take the jars out. The 5-minute timer has gone off, so it is time to very carefully remove the jars from the canner. I have a towel over here because I've got a tile countertop and we do not want the jars to break because they're hot and the counter is cold. The contraption that's in here, that it has the handles on it. We could dig them out and then just pull the whole thing up, but I'm just gonna do it this way. I don't wanna dig in there and try to lift them up. When you lift your jars out of the canner, try not to tip them too much. The water on the top will evaporate on its own pretty quickly. Now we'll just let these rest for 12 to 24 hours. And since 12 hours for me will be 1 o'clock in the morning, I will see you guys back tomorrow, which will of course just be a couple seconds, and I'll show you the very last step. The jars have cooled off and there's only a couple tiny little steps left. We want to make sure that they're all sealed first of all. You can do the tap test and then there'll be a secondary follow-up after that. That is the sound of a sealed jar. Then you'll want to remove the rings. Once the rings are off, I like to just pick them up by the lid to double check. If you hear a dull thud when you tap your jar lid, that's a pretty good indication that it's not sealed. However, that being said, if you're making something like pie filling or applesauce, sometimes in the processing, the food will get up underneath the lid and it will still give you a thud instead of a more hollow tap like this. And that doesn't necessarily indicate that your seal is bad, which is why I always just do a double check and pick everybody up by their lid and make sure that the lid does not come off. Once you have determined that your seals are good, you want to take a wet towel and clean off your jars and get in really good around those ring edges. And the purpose of that is to just make sure that there is no food debris left over on the outside of the jar, which can obviously spoil and cause smelling and otherwise just make, you know, your jar unsavory looking when you go to grab it later to eat it, even though the food inside would most likely be perfectly safe as long as the seal is still good. It's just nice not to have any sticky or moldy things on the outside of your jars. You may be wondering how long these will last in the cupboard, and the answer is twofold. One, they're going to last as long as the seal is good. So if the seal is not broken, the food inside is safe as long as it's been processed properly per the directions that I gave you earlier. The thing about pickles though is after a couple years they do start to get a little bit mushy, and therefore unless you wanted to puree them somehow or you like mushy pickles, I would try to eat them up in a couple years. Once you have all of the lids and little areas where the ring was nice and cleaned off, you'll want to put a label on your jar. This is important, especially if you do a lot of canning. If you wanted to, obviously we're probably not going to forget that these are pickles, but if you do lots of different types of recipes, you might want to know what type of pickle it is. And probably more important than that is if you can every year, you want to know what did you can in 2025 versus what did you can in 2022. And I just put that right on the front there. I put what's in it, and sometimes I put how I made it, and then I put the date as well. And I use dissolvable labels. They're super cheap. You can get them online or at your local like farm feed store. and they wash right off, which is nice because of course we're going to reuse this jar after we open it and eat the food. That's how you make dill pickles. Thanks for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!